let's see. If I close the lid, would that cause it to shut down? No. Pardon me? No, that's fine. All right, folks, welcome. Today's panel is quite a powerful panel, and I've tried to prepare the best I can, but let's see how well we do. What I'm going to do is the structure of the panel is going to be, I'm going to invite all of them to come up here in a minute. I'm going to introduce them, and then I'm going to ask them to give us a bit of their perspective, like a 3 to 5 minute perspective, a bit of a thesis of what they think about the modern era of oil and gas. And once we are finished with that, I have a few prepared questions that we will go through. And after that, I would, when everyone would be falling asleep, I'll go ahead and ask some rapid fire questions. And it will happen, trust me. It does get that boring. And after that, if we have time left, we will go ahead and do a few Q&A. With that, may I request the panelists to come up and join me on the stage. Technologies, my iPhone, the empowered consumer technologies are really going to cause these technologies to get driven in. And he said no. And I have been able to prove him wrong. I'll give you an example. If you have ever been to the oil field or industrial infrastructures of the oil and gas, you will notice that the workers are using their personal devices to take pictures, to record data, and so on, and so on, and so on. And when the CIO or the CTO of the company arrives, they're very disturbed. They're very shocked. But that is the reality on the ground. So that empowered consumer with very powerful devices is going to drive quite a significant change. Another thing that I feel I've noticed in the past 4 to 5 years is the entrance of women in significant numbers in the oil and gas sector. And that is something we will touch on with the panel, that where it predominantly used to be HR, it used to be finance, or just project management. There are more engineers, scientists, researchers who have come into the mix. Something that we will also discuss here is oil and gas may yet find resurgence. And people ask, you know, there is renewable energy coming into play. I have solar, we have other forms, you know, battery technologies are improving. But the fact remains that in 1 liter of refined oil, there is more easily transportable energy than anything else in the world short of nuclear. But for that, you need something very large and significant. So that is one of the key theses I will be presenting here that we will cover. And finally, the new era, the modern era, may be interesting because the spending behaviors of the companies, both the operators, the ones who own the oil wells, and the services companies who provide the service, I think they're going to change quite significantly. The question I have is, which I'll propose here in just a minute, for myself also is, traditionally large companies are incapable of innovating. They talk about it, but incapable of innovating when things get tough because they go back to the basics of what they know. So that is going to be another area we will cover. With that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce my first panelist, and I will ask her to give her perspectives, and then we'll move one by one. It's Mariam Ali Al-Thani. She's a board member of Emirates Science Club. Mariam holds a BS in electrical engineering from UAE University, and she has also received her executive master's in business administration from Zayed University. Mariam is currently a senior specialist with on distribution power assets with DEWA, which is the Dubai Electricity and Water Authority. Mariam has a significant number of affiliations, but the ones that I wanted to touch on were some of the work Mariam shared with me she did in bringing IEEE to the region and being one of the first women to organize it and really help bring about women in engineering conferences to bear, which has had a significant growth. So that has been just exceptional work that I have seen. Mariam has served as a board member of Dubai Quality Group. from 2009 to 2010. She's the Secretary General to Board of Directors for that year, for 2011 to 2012 as well. And if you guys know, the quality group was represented at the American Society of Quality as well by Mariam. Now, this is the fun fact. Mariam is an expert skeet shooter. Do you know what that is? All right. Skeet shooting is when you take a gun and somebody throws a little ball or something up in the air, and you run after it and you shoot it, and you have to be very, very good. So I think that deserves a round of applause. With that, Mariam, as we discussed, I would love for you to give us at least 4 or 5 minutes of your thesis and perspective from your background as you look towards the modern era of oil and gas and in context of women in STEM. Please. I think it's on.
Yes. Yes, just to elaborate, with regard IEEE, I was the former of Women Affinity Group in UAE. And in UAE, we helped other GCC countries and North Africa to form their affinity groups. And plus, I was coordinator for Europe, Africa, Middle East for 2 years, and I achieved an award for being the most growing region in the world for the 2 years, 2007 and 8. That was one of the achievements. Yeah, with regard women in the industry, oil and gas or energy industry, I feel there is a need to have women on board. It's not an option for industries. The new technologies help industries to have the situation which they need expert and people who are expert in that field. You need the good people. You want to achieve your target, and you need the good people, if they are men or women. And it's a global trend also to recruit women, to have them on board. And I don't see any difference between man or woman in terms of deliver. You need someone who achieve. Yes, some areas it's a bit difficult, but if I go for shooting and some people go for sport for weight, and I don't think it's a choice. Women choose this field if she see herself as qualified to do that. And from industry perspective, they need achievement, they need result. So if that match, yes, I don't see there is any obstacle for that.
All right, thank you very much, Mariam. With that, I will move on to Kamal Fareed. Kamal is sitting at the end. Kamal is the Managing Director of Blue Vine Ventures and Fareed Ventures. He's a technology investor, is a 25-year veteran of oil and gas industry, where he founded a company which was exceptionally successful. I call him the original digitizer in the oil and gas sector. We will cover some of that. He had an exceptional exit with that company. He was awarded the Ernst Young's Entrepreneur of the Year in 1801. Okay, you are awake. Good. I just wanted to make sure. In 2011, he was awarded. And he holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical and Computer Engineering from University of Texas at Austin, and an Entrepreneurship Master's from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I have known Kamal for a very long time, and he is one of the most creative individuals who delivers results in the marketplace, and he has a deep knowledge of oil and gas. Your perspective, sir?
So, the theme is modern era of oil and gas, but also talking about women in STEM. And one of the things that I try to do in my career in the oil and gas industry is be a leader in change in both of those areas, actually. So as Sammy, you alluded to, I was one of the original innovators in the digitization of the oil and gas industry. And the way that that played out, so I actually, as an engineer and a business person, had a contribution to that. I built the software that runs the majority now of the U.S. oil and gas operations. And the major change over the last couple of decades that I participated in was changing the oil industry from a business on the production side that ran on a monthly management cycle. At the end of the month, you go and figure out how much oil you produced, how much gas you produced, and then look back and see, okay, where do we need to adjust our production, our operations? And that needed to move to a daily cycle, and that was enabled by bringing computing out into the field and to the wellhead. And so we participated in that by building software that field operators used in order to gather that data and then brought it back to the back office and did the operational accounting and made the oil field management more of a real-time process. One of the interesting things about it is that the oil and gas industry is often thought of as a male-dominated field. But actually, when you went to our user group conferences for this operational software, it turned out that our audience and our users were mostly in the offices female. So women made up the staff in oil and gas companies that tended to take a look at this data, do the accounting for it, operational management of it, and that was very interesting. And we ended up being shaped by that in that our company had a management team that was 50-50 gender balanced. And it was also very international. And both those things are unique or unusual, I'd say, in both the oil industry. You don't typically see a lot of women in management teams in the oil industry. That's changing now with the new generation coming in. And you didn't see that as much in technology companies. So my co-founder in the business was my aunt. And so that experience of building for 25 years a company, working with my aunt and having a gender-balanced management team, really I learned so much about how, my observation was, how that tended to lead to good decision-making. I always like to say that, you know, as an entrepreneur, it was the women around me who kept me from running the plane into the ground. So that's, you know, that's what I learned from the journey of being an entrepreneur in the oil and gas industry is the importance of gender balance and the importance of women in a decision-making team and the importance of moving the ball forward and using oil and gas technology to improve operational efficiency. The future of oil and gas operations is now very challenged by the costs associated with new resource plays, and digitization of operations is going to continue to play a major role in operational efficiency and managing the costs as the new resources that we bring online are more and more expensive to produce.
Thank you very much. I'm going to challenge you back a little bit. You had touched on a bit of your thesis about what you were thinking is about to change. If you could touch on one or two of those points really quick as a part of your investments as you're making, so we kind of understand that perspective.
Okay, so what I'm doing now, so I made a pivot about 4 years ago from being an entrepreneur to being an investor. Now, and the latest thing that I'm working on, which is what I hope to spend the next couple of decades of my life on, is using venture capital as a tool for economic development. So right now we're partnering with governments, and the first government we're partnering with is Saudi Arabia, and taking capital from the government, from sovereign funds, and using that to invest in technology companies and fund those technology companies in expanding their operations into the Middle East.
Yep.
And one of the main things we're trying to accomplish is bringing in jobs for young people and especially for women in the region. And so it's going to be a very interesting journey.
All right, thanks for
Thank you.
for recapping that.
Is that what you were asking for?
Yes, that's
All
what
right.
I was asking for. Thank you. All right, next up is Robin Mills. Robin is the CEO of Comer Energy, and he's non-resident fellow for energy at Brookings, Doha. He's an expert in the Middle East energy strategy and economics. Robin has authored 2 books, The Myth of Oil Crisis and Capturing Carbon, and he's also a columnist on energy and environmental issues at The National. Comments widely on energy issues in media, including the Financial Times, Foreign Policy, Atlantic, and I'm positive you have seen him on CNN, Bloomberg, Sky News, and other network media outlets. He worked for a decade at Shell, concentrating on new business development in the Middle East, followed by 6 years with Dubai Holding and ENOC, Emirates National Oil Company. He holds a first-class degree in geology from the University of Cambridge and speaks 5 languages, including Arabic and Farsi. No, that last one I didn't make up. That's a reality. And with that, please pick a language you would like to speak to us in, and let's hear your thesis. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the kind introduction, Sami. I think I'll keep it simple and stick with English. I think we're seeing, a period of really unprecedented change in the energy industry, and I've been in the energy industry for 20 years, and it's always changing, but definitely the last few years have been the most dynamic and uncertain. And I'll talk about some of the areas in which it's changing, and I think some of those changes have changed not only the business itself, but changed the way business is done in energy, and therefore potentially create new opportunities for women, or at least different situations for women to enter the energy business. So think about what some of these changes are. One of them is a change that's been going on for the past 10 years, 15 years, if not more, but is a change we are going to see play out over our whole lifetimes, and that is the rise of the Asian economies, and particularly China, and now India, and other Asian economies as well, to become the world's dominant economic force going into the 2020s and 2030s. And that means that these countries in this region, the Middle East, their oil and gas exports are ever more orienting towards Asian consumers. And that is obviously a very, very long-term trend, but it's one that's already had a major impact on the industry, not to mention, of course, the wider global economy and politics. The second change that we're seeing is the rise of environmental concerns over climate change in particular, and that means ever more pressure on the oil and gas industry to be more efficient and cleaner, and to demonstrate that it has a long-term future. You may hear some people who will maintain that oil and gas doesn't have a long-term future and is a sunset industry. I don't personally believe that. I think oil and gas has many, many decades of being one of the world's major industries, but it definitely has to adapt to that change and that challenge of climate change and play its part. And of course, along with that, you have the rise of renewable energy. In the past few years, we've seen really dramatic improvements and advances in renewable energy. Here in Dubai, we have one of the world's largest solar plants is being constructed at extremely competitive costs, and this I think will spread throughout the region, and we'll see a lot more use of renewable energy, and of course down the road here in Abu Dhabi we have a very large nuclear power program as well, which was Sami's first, I guess your first love, right? That's good. And then the third major trend that we're seeing is currently is the period of low oil and gas prices, which is a real challenge for the industry. And this is really, the industry's been too successful. It's produced so much oil and gas that the prices have crashed, and the oil and gas companies are having to cope with that. Now prices probably will rise again, but maybe, in my view, not back to the $100 a barrel that everybody got used to over the past few years. And this means an energy industry that has to be more efficient and more flexible and more responsive. And because of this, we're seeing ever more deployment of technology, and I mean that's a pretty broad term, but if we think of what Kamal was referring to earlier, certainly more and more use of digital technologies, the so-called digital oil field, remote working, automation. I think we'll see more and more of that, and we'll see more and more being done in terms of data analysis and the kind of the use of so-called big data and so on in the industry, as the industry shifts away from being a very gritty, dirty, in the field, kind of hard-working kind of industry to one that is governed much more remotely and where the data scientist becomes as important, if not more important, than the rig hand out stacking drill pipe on a rig somewhere.
Well, thank you very much. That was fantastic. So a number of questions will come out of that. May I ask the panelists to move the mics over one way this way? You have a mic for yourself to your left.
Oh.
Yes, so these mics, there you go. Thank you. All right, and last I have, and I hope I pronounce your name correctly, it's Mireille Tolekima. Thank you. Mireille is the founder and managing partner of the independent oil and gas consulting company MT Energy Resources, and she's based in Perth, Australia. A petroleum engineer by background. She received her Bachelor of Science from, what is the name of the university? How would you pronounce that?
Is it in French?
Yes, it is in French. And I was going to ask Robin to help me, but I decided.
Institut supérieur de recherche. It's Institut supérieur de recherche en production automatisée. So
Is it in France?
It's in France.
Okay, no, I'm just
in
kidding.
the
Of
west
course.
part of France, yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. And in France, she has had an accomplished international career in upstream oil and gas. So, you know, are all the audience members here, you know, you guys are very well aware of oil and gas sector? So in what upstream, the important part here to emphasize is when we say upstream, we are talking about looking for places where there are gas and oil reservoirs, searching for them, finding them, drilling for them, and then extracting them. That is called upstream. So just wanted to kind of emphasize that. She's a published author of technical books on the oil and gas industry, a champion and advocate for diversity and women leadership in advancement in their investment and energy sector. And she has been identified and recognized as a woman of influence in the oil and gas sector as well. She's a very dedicated philanthropist also, and has been currently working on an initiative called Energy Angels Foundation, and wish you best of success in that. With that, you know, we covered multiple things, and we talked about that there are so many aspects to oil and gas. Oil and gas economics. Oil and gas is finance. Oil and gas is jobs. Oil and gas is country-based. But on the other end, oil and gas is extreme technology to be able to drill 8 kilometers underground and be able to hit the spot. So you were going to kind of think through some of those and kind of share your thoughts on that with us.
I think Robin, covered quite a lot. The industry, the oil and gas industry is a main driver in most of the economic and social development globally. And it's been a very conservative industry, and not really innovative. But we've reached a point where there's scarcity in finding what I call easy reserve, conventional reserve. And we've seen recently the emergence of non-conventional oil and gas in North America. And so this is going to drive the new technology. We'll have to look at a different way to extract the oil, drill, and the technology will be a key factor here, especially to make all the projects cost-effective and meet the global demand. So that's one aspect that I see as really the new era of the oil and gas industry. Obviously, there's also the human part of it. We have a very aging technical human resource in the oil and gas industry, and that's where women actually come in. There's a big pool to tap in, and that's why I always advocate for women studying or being involved in other technical area to actually get involved in the industry, to be able to embrace careers in the oil and gas industry and empower themselves as well at the same time, because it's been recognized that in STEM, and oil and gas is part of it, engineering, give a big empowerment to women, actually, to be part of this global economic sustainability that we're looking for. So those are the key area really that I see as key to drive the industry. Obviously, as part of the technology, we will need to do things cheap, so which mean at some point going digital, like what Robin was saying, doing things remotely, unmanned, and also use a lot of data analytics to avoid spending money to actually extract the data and look more on data mining, data analytics to actually progress some of the projects. So those are really three key areas that I see evolving in what we call the new era. There's also the global warming issue, and that's going to be a key challenge for the industry to stay competitive. It's going to be about being able to meet the demand while reducing the greenhouse emission, and which means staying away from fossil fuel, which is very damaging for the environment. And that's where you see competition coming from renewable. And the key challenge is that we see all those emerging markets and developing countries getting a very high urbanization, and we need the energy there. So how do we balance all of that in this context? So that's really the key challenge and the key factor we should look at.
Excellent. Thank you. With that, we'll begin a few of our Q&A. One of the things that has remained common that I've previously speaking with every one of the panelists, and we also know that in our sector that remains a concern, is what we call in the United States, and I think it's called the same thing around the world, is big crew change, meaning the people who actually were the subject matter experts in oil and gas, and because of the fluctuations in oil and gas prices, has brought in talent, but then there's no more talent when the oil prices are low, and then becomes a gap. So in that context, I was going to ask Mariam. Mariam, one of the things that I noticed is that you are on multiple boards as well, and one of the boards I saw that you were the only woman on the board. So wanted to kind of come into, from your perspective, I've noticed that UAE government has made significant strides in introducing women in a number of their organizations, and you were sharing with me some of the examples of DIWA. So I was going to see if you could touch on that and give us your thoughts on what are some of the things that the UAE government is doing in that area that can be an example.
Sure. United Arab Emirates government support having women on board, but fortunately I got these words by voting.
By vote, that's great. Congratulations.
Or nomination. So it was not, for example, Dubai Quality Group, it's also male. We have a huge number of men compared to women. I was nominated by my organization to go into the voting because the members had to vote. But successfully I got 87 votes.
Well, congratulations.
And I became on the board. And the second term, I went for Secretary General. I'm still the first lady and the only lady who became a Secretary General in the history of the Dubai Quality Group. So also I got 92 compared to the other guy got 20 votes. I didn't do any monopoly, but people see your results. So they see what you are doing. I'm not with to have only women on the boards or something. You have to get the best persons and to give opportunity for women to take leadership positions. And if she show goodwill, it doesn't represent the whole woman. And if she show not good result, it doesn't mean all women. Similarly, I cannot criticize unsuccessful man to tell all men are not good. So you need to give opportunity for women to be in these positions, and she will give different flavor to the board. Men think the same, but women has different factors can add to the boards. And the government, we are lucky to be in United Arab Emirates, and the government always support women to be in the boards, to take leadership positions, and successfully we have a good number of women who show they are worth for these positions who they took.
Thank you. I'm going to jump to Robin. Robin, you touched on, a tenuous question. People believe that oil and gas is on a decline. And there is the one where it says, no, there's a lot of life left in it. The other parts are, there's only so much that can be extracted. And then there's, you can go on things which are quantifiable, such as the growth in Asia, such as the fact that it is an infrastructure which allows for economic development in some of the fastest ways possible. If you could give a little bit of a perspective on that, because that is part of the future, the modern era of oil and gas from an economics perspective, so please.
Well, I think one of the key realizations over the past couple of years has been that, we're not running out of oil and gas. The resources of oil and gas in the world are enormous, and they're far larger than we're ever likely to use. Eventually there's a complete or near complete transition to using renewable energy or nuclear or other forms of energy. Now, a lot of those resources, as Maria says, are more difficult, more challenging to extract, are in remote locations and so on, require new technologies. But nevertheless, there's plenty of resources. So it's not that we thought 5-6 years ago the world's running out of oil, that's going to end the oil age. Well, it's become clear that's not the case. The issues, I think, the two issues that are more serious for the future of the oil business are, one is the competing technologies. How fast will renewable energy and electric vehicles and other non-oil and gas technologies advance and become competitive? And can they really expand from the current a few percent of the global energy mix? Can they expand to be 80-90% of the global energy mix, especially given all the growth that we have in Asia and other countries? Eventually, yes, maybe, but not quickly, I think. And secondly, of course, as we've said before, the issue of climate change, and can we produce and use oil and gas in an environmentally acceptable way? And I think we have some discussion a little bit later on carbon capture and storage, which is one way to use oil and gas without putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. If that's developed and deployed successfully, that would mean that there's no real environmental barrier to using oil and gas. It would just simply be a question, how competitive is that versus the renewable and other new forms of energy. So given those things, I don't have, personally, I don't have a concern that the industry will disappear. But certainly the industry faces significant challenges over the next few decades to deal with this new competition. But in the past few years, what is kind of the greatest energy technology stories in the world? One is the rise of solar power, but the other one at the same time is the rise of shale oil and gas production in the US, which has grown very quickly to make the US from being an importer of gas to being a net exporter of gas. Some of this gas is even arriving in Dubai at the moment, which is kind of a remarkable turnaround, and the US also being much less dependent on imports of oil. And that is, those two stories, one's in conventional energy and one's in renewable energy, and they're both, I think, equally remarkable. So the energy business has a bright future, I think, whichever part of it you look at.
Thank you. Let me jump back to you, Mira. Would you touch upon the technology aspect? You really emphasized in the 3 points that you made, not only the technology which can be electronics, but you also emphasized data. If you could kind of give a little bit more meat to what you were thinking about.
When I talk about data, like I was mentioning, a lot of the production and reserve that we're going to get are becoming very difficult. We now go very deep sea, so deep water, and obviously there's a limit to the human capacity to be able to have a presence there. So that's why you need some tools to basically when you, for example, drill, to get the data, to get everything that you need to be able to put together a development plan and a strategy to be able to extract some of this production. And the other part is also because, obviously, I'm talking to people who are not familiar. When you basically have discovered a field, there is a management phase that you need to have. So manage to optimize and to produce in a way that it's economics. And for that you need data collection, because whatever we make decision on, we can't see it. So we have to rely on tools, on software, simulation, to be able to make an informed decision to actually action on anything, on a remedial activity, or on drilling a new well, or I don't know.
Does it
getting
remain an
data.
area of opportunity where,
It's
or
still
there
an
are
area.
solutions are out there now?
It's still an area of opportunity, because obviously you have the service companies providing already quite a lot, but the challenge, like I said, it becomes more challenging as we want to access unconventional reserve, and there's an opportunity here to create new tools or optimize whatever tools we have.
Excellent.
And that's really the opportunity that we see in this new era that we are in.
Thank you. Kamal, you have been through a few oil price cycles. And one of the things I was curious about, because you were on the provider side where you were building company, or your companies were providing service to the operators and also the service providers at times, are you seeing a change in how the oil and gas companies behave now than in the previous cycles?
Well, so there's going to be two parts to the answer, and I'm
Okay.
going to talk about shale second, but on the IT side, because that's really what we
Correct.
provided, unfortunately, it hasn't changed that much. So when oil companies are having a tough time, the first thing they can do is they can delay the buying of new software, the implementation, upgrades, replacement of their servers and desktop hardware. So for vendors in the oil industry, downturns like these are brutal. They're just brutal. I'm seeing a major effect on oil field technology startups. New science, new technology that the oil field really needs for operational efficiency and for more efficient extraction in shale, and I'll talk about that in a second, is kind of on hold. So I have a number of startups that I've funded in the space that in this downturn, they just can't generate revenue in the traditional way. They have to go and find new ways through services, et cetera, to just try to survive through this period, but they're not thriving at all.
Can I interrupt you for a second? Robin, do you agree?
I think that's one of the issues with the oil and gas industry. It has not got a good record of implementing and technology. With a few kind of sterling exceptions, but unfortunately, it's often been too slow to implement technology. And as Kamal says, part of that is the downturns. Everybody cuts costs. It's partly, it's a big and expensive industry with long lead times, and that makes it relatively slow moving. It's not, you build an oil platform that lasts for 20 or 30 years. It's not like the iPhone that you change every year, where the pace of technology advance can be much quicker. So that's unfortunate. But I think I mentioned shale oil and gas. That's one area where a lot of new technologies have been adopted very quickly because it's been intensely competitive, and only the companies that have adopted technologies quickly have actually survived this far.
Excellent. And your next point was?
Yeah, so the point on shale is this is really changing the way that that oil companies and gas companies have to implement operational efficiency. So in the past, you discovered oil, you drilled the wells, but the lifting costs were fairly low. And in fact, the development costs, the cost of drilling the wells, tended to be low compared to the cost of acquiring the land and the infrastructure that had to be built. With shale, you have this new scenario where the cost of drilling and hydraulically fracturing the well really dominates your cost structure. And out of the wells, about a third of them really are underproducers, don't do very well. About half of them are very average. Sorry, about a third of them are average, and a third of them make all the money. And so tons of money flooded in to the shale industry, and there were a lot of wells drilled. Most of the wells that were drilled probably didn't need to be drilled or were uneconomical because there were too many assumptions about the subsurface being homogeneous when it's really very heterogeneous. It's very rock that's a few meters away from other rock is very different
Coming
in shale
back
resource.
coming back to the point.
Yeah, so the point is there's a lot of emphasis that needs to go into better understanding of subsurface in shale oil field development. That's a major area of technology development because the old technologies for traditional reservoirs didn't translate very well to shale reservoirs, and now you need to be more efficient in how you apply capital. So capital was not applied efficiently in shale development, and that's why there was too much money that came in, too much drilling, overproduction, and a lot of inefficiency in how the capital was spent. That's going to be the big revolution going forward is efficiency of capital, efficiency of operation.
Excellent. Let me bring this to, it's always amazing for me. For every 10, maybe 20, you can correct me, petroleum engineer men, there is one, maybe. Is it 50-to-1 ratio? And when I saw that you were a petroleum engineer. So I wanted to see how has that experience been? You have been out in the field, you have been in a very male-dominated engineering discipline, and this would be one of the ones where there's a lot of opportunity for women in STEM and STEAM.
Yeah.
But wanted to find out from you just your perspective on how has it been with the number of decades that you have worked in this sector as a woman and as an engineer. Did you see any differences which could be of value for our audience to hear?
I think I've seen some progress. I mean, when I started 20 years ago, it was very challenging. Obviously, I was the only woman around, and you go in the field, it's very difficult to find your feet, and I think the men were not helpful. But at the end of the day, you have to work in this environment to get whatever knowledge or whatever training that you want to progress in the industry. And it's about communication. Be able to communicate with your male colleagues and be really frank about how you feel and what you need. And at the end of the day, most of my mentor in the industry have been fantastic male figures. And that's where I think I always tell women that sometimes we create the problem ourselves. Obviously, we find an environment where it's male-dominated, but we have to go there and talk and communicate and express what we want and ask for what we want to really be able to progress and go to a high level. And that's something that needs to really be emphasized, because if we just sit there and we just see the glass ceiling and we just see all the barriers, we don't go anywhere. And I think that's how I managed to navigate the industry. Seeing the barriers, saying, okay, the barriers are there, but I'm going to concentrate on the opportunity and how, even if it's a very small hole, how can I pass through this hole? And do it with the men working with me. And it's been very, very successful.
This is exactly what, Mariam, you and I were talking about, communication being key, and some of your experiences, if you could share how that was for you.
Yes, maybe simple communication difference between men and women. When I started my work in Dubai Aluminium, I was in technical support and maintenance. So every day, my colleague is bringing a cup of tea to my seat. So I cannot So to avoid me to get with them, they have a mess kitchen. They do their coffee, and when that colleague went on leave, I was looking where I can make the coffee. I saw a mess, dirty table. So I was surprised how I drink the coffee every time from. This is one of the things. When we go to any meeting, men always they share together their thoughts prior to the meeting. But women in general, I'm not but generally, we like to surprise the people in the meeting with the best idea, and we are thinking that everyone will say, okay, this is the perfect idea. While men before that in the coffee shop or in the canteen or the day before, they discuss and they make the lobby before presenting the idea in the meeting, and they see majority of people supporting their idea. And this is the difference. So we get upset and we think our idea is the best, while this environment doesn't prefer these surprises. That's what I personally feel. So we can be women, and we can talk to the male-dominated environment, not with men language. We are women. We cannot change our gender just to cope with the work. We have to be ourselves. But we have to understand these barriers. So we can use some of the techniques which we can do within our language to get people understand our needs, similar to my colleague, what she said, that she talked to her mentor. Maybe in, for example, utility sector is different culture of, so we have to understand the culture of the organization. I've been in Dubai Aluminium, Dubai Cable, so the cable industry is different than aluminium industry. Utility sector is different. So every sector has a different language, and every organization has a different language. So we have to understand first the communication, then use our way to communicate, and till we get it right. So the barriers or the ceiling is ourselves. If I am a woman or a man, we don't see men struggle, but frankly speaking, even in the board, as I said, in the Dubai Equality Group board, most of the majority of people promised that guy they are voting for him. I didn't ask anyone. I was surprised of the result, and he was sitting near to me. I got 92 out of 120. And imagine all tables promising him, and they are men, of course, promised him that they will vote for him. At the end, they voted for me. Because I was working for 2 years, and they see our result. I don't discriminate. They see myself. They don't care if I'm woman or man. They see if me in person can serve their needs in the board. That's what people are thinking. Yes, maybe 10% of people, they have a preference of that man or this woman, but majority of people, they see their benefit out of this.
Thank you.
That's what is
This
my
is very
opinion.
good. I appreciate the insights and your personal experience there. I'm going to kind of ask Robin a little bit of again, it's one of those contentious points that you always hear. Climate change, impact of renewables on oil and gas. What are your perspectives on those 2 points?
Well, as I think I said, the climate change is a long-running challenge, and it's going to be a challenge to the industry for the rest of this century, probably. And, although we're making progress, emissions of greenhouse gases keep rising, and even if at a slower rate, and so the problem gets worse. Now, there's hope, I think, on the advances on renewable energy. There's hope on advances on carbon capture, on greater efficiency, and so on. I think we can see a path to dealing with climate change, but it's really, technology is important, improved technology, and particularly getting costs down, but also political political will and political agreement is very important, international political agreement and also political will within certain countries. The UAE, I think, has been quite vocal and quite progressive in its climate policies and has been very active in international negotiations and at home in introducing solar power and so on. Some other countries have been active and some other major countries, unfortunately, have not taken the lead that they need to take. Now, I think this means energy companies themselves have had more and more of a job to do to explain themselves to the wider public and to the media, explain what they're doing about climate change, and also to convince people who are entering the industry that it's not firstly, it's not a sunset industry, that it has a long future ahead of it, but also that it's not a negative industry that's only doing environmental damage. It's an industry that is trying to clean up what it does, but it's also an industry that's vital for the world economy. You might see people comparing it to the tobacco industry, but tobacco is entirely a negative, whereas oil and gas has been the driver of economic development and growth across the world through the whole of the 20th century, and will continue to be, as I said earlier, in Asia and Africa and other developing parts of the world. So I think that's also a very important job that the industry has to do, is tell its own story, and find the environmentalists have a role to play, and they have a case to make, and they do it very well. But the industry also needs to tell its own story, and I'm not only hype and propaganda, but also tell a genuine story about what it's doing to improve its environmental performance. And of course, we may be setting renewable energy and the oil and gas industry at odds, but they're not necessarily. Several major oil companies invest in renewable energy, different kinds, and probably will do so increasingly as renewable energy becomes more widespread and more competitive. So that doesn't have to be a simple distinction either.
Thank you. Kamal, last question for you. If you look out towards the future, in the audience, I am personally interested in seeing where would growth be. So if I were to say, I have $1 million and I'm interested in going into the oil and gas sector to create some type of technology that I can grow, what part of the oil and gas sector would you say that as an entrepreneur I can go ahead?
Well, I can tell you where my new investments over the last couple of years have been in oil and gas technology, and they've been primarily in earth sciences, in better imaging and better processing of seismic data, to better understand the subsurface. The big problem that we have in shale resources in particular, and in optimizing other types of conventional resources, whether they're CO2 flood or conventional carbonate reservoirs as you have in this region, are better understanding exactly what is in the ground, the characteristics of the rock, the characteristics of the fluids, young, and they're applying a lot of new data visualization techniques to it. So, here you have two technology companies both applying math that took a lot of time to develop, but one is an older team and one is a very young team.
Well, so just in conclusion, there is opportunity in oil and gas, which is rich for the two-man shop in the garage.
Absolutely. These are both smaller teams developing highly impactful technology, but in my opinion right now, the biggest challenge we have is still understanding the subsurface.
Okay. Now, last question for you. Would you assume I am an entrepreneur, same question. I have $1 million, I have a team that I can build. What would you say, as a petroleum engineer, you have touched just about every piece of upstream. So what would you say is an area where I should go look? What are the 3 areas, for example?
I think there are quite a lot of tools. I mean, if you look at the chain, the super chain from down the subsurface to downstream, there's quite a lot of tools, but the weakness really is the integration of everything. And that's where I see the added value in this new era that we're going into. Because like I was mentioning at the beginning, is that the oil and gas industry has been talking to itself. And it's very difficult to innovate and to really grow in this type of context. So it's first step, integrate the food chain where there are opportunity at all level, and also collaborate and integrate with other industry like IT, which means looking at how to develop new tool, new software to better imaging the subsurface and find new field, new reserve. There's also the integration with the education side, where I was talking about aging workforce and really tailor the education system to actually address that as well. And obviously the economic side of things, to look at the sustainable development at longer term. How does oil and gas contribute to that, and what are the challenges? So that's really the way I see the opportunity and the new era that we're talking about, not just looking at the technical side,
Excellent.
but looking at the full picture in globally and in the full chain, supply chain as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Panelists, what I would request is that we discussed a closing statement. With this, I would be asking you to provide 2 to 4 minutes of your closing perspective to the audience. So with that, Mariam, I would like for you to start to give us some of your thoughts.
Generally, we shouldn't think too much of barriers. We have to overcome the barriers, because men also face different barriers in their fields, in the promotions. Maybe in that field we face difficulties, but sometimes we face difficulties to work also with women senior managers, right? It is, if we consider some senior woman in the position, why she choose man or woman? And that, so if we don't think too much on this barrier and we overcome and think of improving ourselves to overcome these barriers, we will move well. And this is the way I think. Yes, there is challenge for everyone, but focusing in challenge and excusing will not solve the problem. And this one thing. Second, the country, if I'm talking about United Arab Emirates, supporting women in every field, not only Emirati women, even non-Emirati women. For example, in Dubai Electricity and Water Authority, we have equal pay for men and women, no matter what is her if she's from Emirates or not, what is her nationality or his nationality. Equal pay, equal benefits, and considering women take leave for pregnancy and others, but at the same time, the salary is equal. I get the same as my colleague who's having the same experience. Second thing, the country of UAE built some NGOs, support NGOs similar to Emirates Science Club. It's Emirates Science Club is an NGO which is there for all Emiratis to do their experience in science or electronics or computers. And we are running many workshops in drones or robotics, which Emiratis, men and women, can come and do the experience. So the country is doing many things for Emiratis and open the area for non-Emiratis for different labs, workshops, and I think we need results. So everything is available for people to be creative, innovative, but this country needs people to build the future for future generation. This is just.
Thank you very much, Mariam. I'm going to jump to you, Kamal.
Yes, I think the big question is the oil and gas industry an opportunity for women in STEM? Does that fit over the next couple of decades? And so first of all, is the industry going to be around? Well, I think that there's no question that if we stop burning hydrocarbons, that would be better for our environment, but that's not practical if for no other reason than the scale of the industry. We produce over 1,000 barrels per second of oil and gas equivalents globally. 70% of that we burn. 30% of that we use to make things. That 30% will always be needed. In fact, that'll grow. So we'll always need to make things out of hydrocarbons. But in the long run, perhaps we can burn less and less of it. But the scale of it's so big that that's not going to change for decades, even as renewables grow. The future challenges in oil and gas are solved with STEM because the rising costs of finding and developing resources needs technology, needs engineering, needs science in order to solve and be more efficient. And so there's a big opportunity for women coming into the oil and gas industry because those STEM jobs are on the increase. And the culture of the industry is very inclusive. What I see in the industry is more and more women coming into the industry, and I think that it's a great place to build a career.
Ali, closing statement from you.
Yeah, I do agree with Kamal. I mean, we've come a long way as women being involved in the industry. There have been some policies and a change of culture to actually integrate and have more women entering the industry. But the big problem, I think, right now is not really to have the women coming into the industry, is to have them staying in the industry.
Interesting.
And that's the key challenge that we need to address, because with family responsibility and everything that actually fall into women's shoulder at a certain point in life, that's the battle that we normally have. And we should focus the effort on trying to tailor some policies, some regulation to actually get the women to stay in the industry. And it's quite important that we have them to stay, because we need their talent, we need their skills, and to actually be able to continue to run the business and continue to provide sufficient energy to the industry. So that's key. And I mean, it's an exciting industry. I mean, it comes with challenges, but we have, as women, I mean, I think it's also very mythical sometimes. That, okay, it's a male-dominated industry, I'm not going to be able to make it, to progress and to have a career, but that's totally up to us. The challenges are there. We should just find ways to address them and continue the route and make
Excellent.
it. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And Robin, please bring us back home.
Yes, I'm looking back a little bit to when I graduated. I studied geology at university, and that's which is how I got into the oil industry. And there were about 70 people in my year. And geology had always been a very traditionally male-dominated science. Now, by the time I was studying it, it was actually pretty much 50-50, the class that I studied in. And when we all graduated, oil was at $10 a barrel. It was very hard to get jobs, so very few of us went into the oil industry. But I think of about 4 of us who are still in the industry, 3 of them actually women, one of whom has been very one of the leading figures in discovering a lot of oil off Brazil. So, you know, women from that generation definitely have played an increasing role in the industry. I think if we think about this region in particular, of course, we know that there are social, cultural, organizational barriers to women in the workforce, and those are, you know, maybe dissipating gradually, but being realistic, they still do remain. Again, if you look back to the kind of old-fashioned oil industry, then it was very important to have a job in the field at some point and be out on the well site, and that I think played a role in hampering some women's progress. I look back to some women who got started in the industry here in the early 80s, who were amongst the very first women to be going and working in the field, and that at that point was a big social change and a big challenge for their organizations to accept. Now it's more common. But I think the change in the industry we're seeing, that we've been talking about, more use of digital technologies and remote working and data analysis and so on, has meant it's a job where it's, you know, field workers are important, but less so than they used to be. So I think some of those barriers to women's greater involvement are coming down bit by bit. And of course, we said at the start, I think, women, I think in the industry typically tend to be involved in HR and finance and training and these kind of areas. But no, again, we are seeing much more women in technical disciplines now. So that's, it's a steady change, but of course these things take time to develop role models, but also for attitudes to change. I think you still hear some attitudes in this region towards women in the oil industry, which you would not hear probably in Europe and North America. Kind of old-fashioned attitudes that are gradually disappearing. And I think, also as we've discussed, I don't think anybody entering the industry now, whether male or female, should be concerned about that they're entering a dying industry or something. No, it's an industry with a lot of vitality, a lot of growth in it. Yes, a lot of challenges too, but I mean, an industry that can provide a very, very interesting, long-term, challenging career, and an industry that, I think, as I've also said, by going into oil and gas, that does not mean any opposition to renewables. It doesn't mean that you won't even work on renewables. I mean, in my own career, although I've been mostly in oil and gas, I've also turned to working on solar power more recently as well. So, it is an industry, a very diverse industry with a lot of different opportunities and challenges, and been a fascinating one for me and for some of my female colleagues who I've been on this journey with as well.
Thank you very much, Robin. Folks, thank you very much for joining us for the panel. In the end, some of the key takeaways are oil and gas remains a key contributor to positive economic growth in many parts of the world, if not across the globe. Yes, there are impacts which, as technology and science improves, is going to provide us other methods and means of storing energy and its transportation and use. Other facts that we discussed, and which are realities, are the growth of women in STEM education and STEM careers. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight, which Srini Palavarthi from UCLA stated, that things are good, very good in United States. I have worked for organizations where the focus on diversity has been very, very significant. Different parts of the world, as Robin highlighted, and everybody else on the panel further supported, have their own concerns and considerations, but it is on the positive turn. And finally, technology, because of its democratization, the ability for us to be able to do some of the things that we can do more at a consumer level, and small groups are allowing us to really bring new technologies and ideas into the market very, very quickly. With that, thank you, panelists. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mariam. Thank you, Robin and Kamal, for joining us and providing us with your thoughts and ideas. With that, I close this panel. Thank you.